On time. Spot on. So no decent conference could possibly happen without a good lawyer about it. We've had a relationship with Covington Burling now for, well, way beyond the CleanEquity arrangements, but an extraordinary firm represented around the world in some of the key countries, obviously a DC based, but Beijing office that we've worked with before that have helped us do business in China, an amazing business in China. And so what we're going to do now, I'm introducing Covington here, Covington and Burling. What's the real name, full name, proper name of the...
So we rebranded a few years ago, and unfortunately Mr. Burling lost that battle. So he now has a beautiful conference room named
Wasn't
after
there
him.
a television program called Suits that had a similar situation that was going on?
That one, yeah.
Anyway, Sebastian is with us in person. The rest of the team, some in DC, some in California, some in London. And so what I'm going to do is give the signal. We're going to roll a video. Sebastian will then come up at the end of the video and be here to answer questions. So thank you very much. Let's roll it.
Hello and welcome to all presenting companies, delegates, co-sponsors and others to our policy outlook discussion on EU and US decarbonisation strategies. My name is Simon Amies and I am a partner in the London corporate group of international law firm Covington Burling. As many of you know, we have been supporting CleanEquity Monaco for many years, and this is only the second time in 11 years I haven't been in Monaco for the event, so I do know what I'm missing. We'd originally planned to run a CEO bootcamp seminar as part of the programme this year, which would have involved some highly interactive sessions on 4 topics: venture term sheet hotspots, IP licensing and strategic collaborations, founder and investor governance tension, and strategic exits. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to offer this as part of the hybrid event, but to avoid any disappointment, we will be running this online in the next few weeks. CEOs of presenting companies should stay tuned for more details. But this has meant that we have the opportunity to hear from some of our policy experts who ordinarily don't attend the event on the highly relevant topic of EU and US decarbonisation strategies. So I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Lindsay Brewer, Sebastian Voss, and Gary Guzzi. Lindsay will moderate the discussion. She is a member of our policy and regulatory practice based in our Washington office, who advises on a range of topics related to climate change, environmental marketing, and corporate social responsibility. Sebastian Voss is in our Brussels office, and he is chair of our global public policy practice and head of its European division. He has worked on energy and climate issues for over a decade and is a member of the World Economic Forum's CEO Action Group on the European Green Deal. a high-level platform of around 40 CEOs who support the European Green Deal agenda and work with EU leaders to develop concrete plans for positive climate action. He's also the only one of our team who is actually present in Monaco. Gary Guzzi is based in our Washington office and has extensive governmental policy experience on climate, energy, and the environment. He has twice been appointed by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate to serve in high-level positions. First by President Bill Clinton as the General Counsel of the US Environmental Protection Agency, and then by President Barack Obama as Deputy Director of the White House's Environmental Council. He is co-lead of our firm's Energy Industries Group and advises companies on the intersection of public policy and clean energy, sustainability, climate, and environmental matters. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you for those kind introductions, Simon. Welcome to Covington's policy outlook on EU and US decarbonization strategies. Today, we will discuss the decarbonization policy landscape across the EU and US, how businesses can participate in shaping these critical policies, and the role of technology in economy-wide decarbonization initiatives, frameworks and events shaping the political landscape. What is the political and policy context in which the EU and US are developing their policies on decarbonization? Sebastian, let's begin with the EU.
Great, thanks very much, Lindsay. So as I think many of you will know, particularly those of us gathered here in Monaco, it's EU Green Week this week, and that is something which has become more and more important and more interesting. It will be no surprise to anybody that climate change, sustainability, and all of these issues have come more and more to the fore. First of all, of course, citizens are experiencing climate change firsthand, from record temperatures across EU capitals and even Mont Blanc. This summer, the various action groups that are being set up, such as the one that we're involved in, the WEF CEO Action Group on the European Green Deal, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But I think we're here in particular to talk about, the European Commission and the actions that they have taken. So as most of you will know, the European Commission, the new European Commission started in December of 2019, and they had as their program two main areas that they wanted to focus on. The first was the digitization of the economy, and the second was climate. Climate, of course, is focused around the European Green Deal, which is a raft of new sort of initiatives and pieces of legislation that are going to have a massive impact across the continent and, in fact, I think globally. So President Ursula von der Leyen, who is the head of the President of the European Commission, was able to announce the European Green Deal in her plans. It has wide support from the European Parliament. I think it's also fair to say that obviously green politicians have seen a real rise in terms of their popularity, and also they've been elected in far greater numbers than ever before in, for example, Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, and so on. So the European Parliament, national parliaments, citizens, all of these are pointing in the same direction, which is to say that sustainability and climate are extremely important. So what Ursula von der Leyen did was to appoint, I think, certainly one of her best, or certainly a colleague who I have a lot of respect for, somebody who I also by chance have known for 30 years, which is Frans Timmermans, who is the first vice president responsible for the Green Deal. He's also very closely involved in this aforementioned WEF CEO Action Group. But he has the support of a whole range of different commissioners when it comes to fulfilling his mandate around the Green Deal, including energy, transport, environment, agriculture, cohesion and reforms. So, they really are lining up all together in order to make sure that the Green Deal is as successful as it can be. Now, of course, nobody was expecting the COVID pandemic. And that certainly threw everyone for a loop, I'd say, earlier in the year. But one of the things that has led to, again, as many in the room will know, is the 672 billion euros in next generation EU programs, which have been developed in order to stimulate the economy, but are very much being steered in a direction where this money should also be supporting the EU's objectives when it comes to the Green Deal, sustainability, and so on and so on. And there's a whole raft of programs, again, some of this we'll get into later, where I think many of the companies in this room could benefit from knowing what they are and potentially gaining from funding or the direction of travel on policy and so on. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks for that illuminating synopsis. Gary, please share with us the policy context in the United States.
Of course, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you all. I so appreciate the work that you all do in this important area. No doubt everyone's familiar that climate change and the politics surrounding it have become a hugely divisive issue in American politics. On the one hand, President Trump early on issued an executive order that established the tenor of his administration, making it an official U.S. policy to remove any impediments to U.S. energy production. And his administration has then taken steps to implement a series of actions, and we'll talk about the details of some of them that implement that vision. He and his party, in short, don't really acknowledge the scientific basis for climate change. They don't recognize the importance of U.S. leadership in forging an international solution to this challenging global problem. And his reelection campaign has doubled down on that approach. It's heavily critical of Vice President Biden's clean energy and climate plan. And the Republican-controlled United States Senate has largely gone along with this approach. The Democratic-controlled House of Representatives is powerless to respond in a meaningful way to the climate challenge on its own. Now, array that against what's happening on the Democratic side. Former Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris have embraced the need to address climate change as very much a core part of their agenda. They see four crises that they describe that are the great crises that America faces, and they're building their campaign and their transition around responding to those. So along with the challenges posed by the pandemic that Sebastian referred to, the need for a robust economic recovery that really is tied to that, the national recognition of systematic racial injustice, the Vice President and Senator Harris have put climate on a par with that. And that's a fundamentally different vision of the climate science. It's a different vision of the role of government and of politics. They believe that the promise of jobs from U.S. economic leadership in an energy transition and U.S. innovation will have very broad support among a winning coalition of environmental activists, union workers, college-educated voters, urban and suburban residents who increasingly are worried about the storms and wildfires that have been battering the U.S. So they are trying to bridge a liberal wing of the Democratic Party that would go even further and ban all fossil fuels. And that's spurred in many ways by that robust youth activism that has been so important in the EU. But regardless of the details, the upcoming election will really be a watershed event for determining U.S. politics and action to address climate change. And it's worth noting that not only on the presidential side is that true, but on the legislative side as well. Congress could swing parties too. The Senate, as some of you may know, is currently made up of 53 Republicans, 45 Democrats, 2 independents who vote with the Democrats. And the Dems must win 3 or 4 of the Republican-held seats in order to actually have control of the Senate. 3 if the new vice president is Senator Harris, a Democrat, and 4 if not. And those chances seem good, given that there are 23 Republican seats that are up for election and just 12 democratically held seats. Let me add one last thought about this, which is we're all sort of experiencing a bit of foreboding on whether, come November 3rd, election day, we'll have results or whether there will be a protracted fight over the legitimacy of election outcomes, because we candidly haven't seen a president before who has not committed to leaving office in a graceful manner based upon the election outcome. So certainly the next few weeks will be interesting and decisive, to say the least.
Certainly true. With all of that context in mind, What are the most significant EU and US policy changes on the near-term horizon that will drive decarbonization of carbon-intensive sectors of the economy? Perhaps we can begin with the EU again.
Thanks, Lindsay. Now, as you may know, and as many of those in the meeting will know, the EU tends to operate on a 5-year plan. That sounds like another part of the world, maybe, but that's how it is. And so the European Green Deal is something that they plan to focus on for certainly a 5-year period. But of course, you know, the aims are much longer term. Some of you will have seen that the European Commission announced just last month that they want to raise their climate ambition to a 55% reduction in EU greenhouse gases by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Now, some would say that that's extremely ambitious. I know that there were some in the European Parliament who felt that it wasn't ambitious enough and that it needs to be 60%. There was an event actually last Friday with Commissioner or Vice President Timmermans where he was challenged on that and said, you know, shouldn't it be higher? And he said, you know what, 55 is very ambitious, but I'm confident that we can do it. Let's not try to push it any further, at least not for now. But anyway, so you know, trying to reach that goal will mean that there's going to be a whole raft of changes and policies. Examples of the areas that they're looking to cover range from renewable energy, energy systems and how those work together and interact, emissions trading, prices for carbon, the carbon border tax, taxation more broadly, tariff levies, environmental financing, how environmental disclosures, what the rules are for those, and then of course just straight funding for a variety of projects. Now the funding is interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, there's the 672 billion euros which are going to be part of Next Generation EU. And one of the most important parts of that is going to be something called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the RRF. And what that does is give authority both to the European Commission and to the member states directly to direct funds in order to support projects that they think are worthwhile. And that comes to about 310 billion in grants and another 250 billion in loans. So these are obviously, you know, serious amounts of money. Then in terms of decarbonization specifically for energy intensive areas, there have been 7 flagship areas which the European Commission identified, and I think there's 2 of them which are worth flagging. The first is what the Commission calls Power Up, and that focuses on future-proof clean technology and the acceleration of the development of renewables, looking, for example, at increasing renewable power generation using greater electrolyzer capability and focusing a lot on hydrogen. And then secondly, there's what they're calling recharge and refuel. You have to give credit to whoever comes up with these catchy names, but recharge and refuel. And that's a lot to do with transport. So refueling stations for Teslas and the like, but also extending public transport where possible. And so the ambition is to build about 1/3 of the 3 million charging points needed by 2030 by 2025. So that's in sort of roughly 5 years' time. So that's a pretty ambitious target. I'd say that, you know, with all of these things, for the companies in the room, now is the time really to get to grips with what the Commission is trying to do. There's a whole raft of initiatives, and some of them could potentially be harmful for some of the businesses. You know, I mean, this is perhaps not the case in this room, but certainly there are businesses that will have difficulty with some of these proposals. But there's also a lot of opportunity, what we sometimes refer to as policy-driven growth, which I think we'll get into later. So for the people in this room, I think mainly opportunity. Lindsay.
Thanks, Sebastian. Lots of focus on technology and funding there. Gary, how do anticipated policy changes in the United States compare?
Well, Lindsay, I'm a little jealous of the clarity of the steps that Sebastian's outlined. We'll certainly know a lot more in a few weeks, or so we hope. But, you know, there are some takeaways. First, I think a second term would afford President Trump the opportunity to deliver on many of the steps that he's just started. So, you know, probably the most prominent example is the U.S. shortly will be able, under the rules, to consummate its withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. and the president also will have an opportunity to defend in the court his actions to roll back the major carbon reduction initiatives that were undertaken during the Obama administration. And those include notably the greenhouse gas limits and fuel switching for the electric power sector, GHG emissions limits and fuel economy standards for motor vehicles that were very ambitious and have been rolled back, even controls over methane leakage from natural gas production wells and facilities. And we wouldn't expect major action on short-term potent climate gases, such as steps to ratify participation in the Kigali Amendment that addresses HFCs. Again, a doubling down of the policies of the last 4 years. Certainly that will drive a further fight between the states led by California and New York, who are driving coalitions that are assert that they can set their own ambitious greenhouse gas emission standards and accomplish a clean energy transformation. And they make the case that even without that U.S. participation at the national level, at the subnational level, the U.S. is still meeting its Paris climate obligations. Now, we expect that a Biden-Harris administration, and truth be told, they've had some opportunity to help to advise the campaign on these issues as part of its policy formulation effort, that it will take a series of sweeping and really robust steps from the very first day in office to fundamentally change course. And that is designed to be commensurate with the recognition that we're now in the last remaining decade for decisive action to prevent a global climate disaster. And that's an understanding that has really resonated, I think, with the former Vice President and Senator Harris. And some of those changes may go to the very structure of government itself. There's been a lot of discussion about a possible climate cabinet and strong White House leadership focus. On the international front, there's likely to be a very concerted push to reestablish U.S. diplomatic leadership on climate with a sort of signature effort to re-enter into the Paris Climate Accord and perhaps even to host an early climate summit. And domestically, I would expect that the major climate regulatory rollbacks will be ended, that will take steps to move to a net zero electric generation system by 2035, to have a robust embrace similar to what Sebastian outlined for the EU of electric cars and trucks and much tougher emission standards, careful regulation of natural gas as a bridge fuel. And, you know, since the administration is thinking about this transformation as very much part and parcel of its economic recovery plans, what's gotten known as Building Back Better, we also expect that there will be tens of billions of dollars of significant and creative investments that will be designed to spur new technology, to overcome the obstacles to that, including an advanced research type program similar to our military R&D ARPA program that will be known as ARPA-C, ARPA Climate, and that will generally facilitate greater deployment of renewables, offshore wind, green hydrogen included, invest in energy efficiency for buildings, both commercial and residential, and have hundreds of billions of dollars in new clean infrastructure investments. And that may include transit, it may include a revived rail system, enhanced grid capabilities and transmission, and a focus on furthering climate resilience as well. So to give you a sense of the scale, the detailed Biden-Harris climate and energy and infrastructure campaign plan calls for investing $2 trillion with a T, $2 trillion in the US over the course of the first Biden 4-year term. And much of this investment will be designed also to address the disparate health and economic inequality issues that have come to the fore during the pandemic and with the recent racial injustice events and protests in the US. And there's an explicit commitment for 40% of this investment to benefit frontline communities. So these sweeping plans won't be an afterthought or a second or third priority to come after other sort of legislative efforts such as, universal health care or something else, but they're really deeply embedded in the overall administration priorities that are likely to roll out. And of course, funding for much of this does depend upon having a aligned and cooperative Congress. But as the current administration has demonstrated, it certainly is possible to accomplish a very significant transformational climate, clean energy, and resilient infrastructure agenda, even without full control of the U.S. Congress.
Thanks for that explanation. Given the significant investment opportunities contemplated in both the EU and the US, what are the best leverage points for businesses and investors to influence the contours of these pending policy changes? Sebastian?
Thanks, Lindsay. Before I answer that, I just wanted to say that, of course, we in Europe, with an interest in sustainability, very much hope that the US will become the great partner that they've been on this in the past. I think we all know that this issue cannot be tackled by one continent alone. So that's on the positive side. On the perhaps slightly more difficult side, typical, Gary, that you have to upstage us with your 2 trillion. We do our best with 750 billion, but anyway, let's park that for a moment. To answer your question, Lindsay, I think now is a great time to engage. There have been a whole series of the way this typically works in Europe, where we have sort of consultations, where the Commission, who has the right of initiative for these things, has an idea. They sort of publish that idea. They get responses from industry, and then they come out with papers, with proposals, and then it moves into regulation. And on a lot of these issues, we've moved sort of from that first phase of like the big picture, and we're now moving more into the technical level. And that's actually, I think, where a lot of useful work can be done by companies. And that can be done both at the European Union level, but European Commission primarily, but also at the member state level, because as I outlined earlier, a lot of the funding and so on comes from the member states. There's also a number of areas, including, for example, batteries, which we'll talk about a bit later, and hydrogen, where there have been big so state aid is of course a big issue in Europe, and something that typically the European Commission, in particular DG Competition, are very wary of. But when it comes specifically to initiatives that are trying to support, they're being, I think, more accepting of that and trying to promote these technologies. So I would say that companies, with an interest in particular pieces of the various bits of regulation, can either go it alone. There's no harm whatsoever in coming to see, a member state politician, someone in the energy ministry, for example, or someone at the Commission, and making their own point if they think that it's a very specific point where they, as a company, are perhaps better positioned than their competitors. To benefit from something, or where they are more likely, frankly, to have problems with a proposed piece of legislation. And the way in which you engage really depends on whether your issue is unique to your company, or whether it's something that might impact various companies in the sector, or even various different sectors. What we see often, Brussels has around 15,000 lobbyists. Some of those are company specific, some are trade associations and others. And frankly, if you're company specific, it's probably better for you if you're willing to sort of go it alone. But obviously, the more voices on an issue, particularly if you're trying to change something, the better. So I'd say those are the various different ways you can do things. One thing which I think has been very effective, and I don't say that just because I'm involved in it myself, is the World Economic Forum's CEO Action Group for the European Green Deal, which is not quite as snappy a name as Power Up and Refuel and Recharge, but it's a very impressive outfit. It's around 40 CEOs from major European companies, some who are frankly in what one might consider carbon unfriendly industries, including airports and others, and some very much on the sort of the new technology end of things. And what we're trying to do with that group, working closely with Frans Timmermans and the energy ministers of various different governments, is to come up with a series of policy papers and a series of lighthouse projects where we can demonstrate, to the Commission, to regulators, to governments, but also to citizens, that these companies are committed to, taking concrete actions to change. Two examples of that, although I can't go into too much detail yet. We'll be announcing part of these in January in the virtual Davos, and then the rest in May in what's supposed to be the new Davos taking place in Lucerne. But one has to do with net zero building, and the other has to do with green investments, where they're looking at ways in which green investments can be made, more secure, better understood, and so on and so on. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks for highlighting some of the benefits and opportunities of engaging as an individual company or as a coalition. Gary, what are these leverage points in the United States, and how would they differ depending on the results of the election?
Yeah, Lindsay, it's interesting that regardless of what government does, I think in the last 4 years, almost perhaps because of inaction, that public expectations and a focus on business actions have really grown. So that I think there will be enhanced expectations on transparency and reporting, on carbon emissions, on sustainability practices, and even on carbon-intensive investments. And that focus will really, I think, grow in the continued absence of U.S. action to address climate if the president's reelected. If the election outcome changes things, businesses should recognize that it will take a little bit for the transition teams to take their skeleton crews, turn them into landing teams at the agencies, and really get that transition planning into gear. But then there are terrific opportunities to set a trajectory for the first 100 days of action by the new administration, even the very first day of sort of signature executive actions, along with an opportunity to participate in formulating more sweeping legislative proposals. And given the range of interests in these actions, our experience has been that that's often best accomplished through coalitions of like-minded companies, because that helps to amplify their perspective. And, such as has happened over the last several years with companies who have been advocating for a carbon pricing mechanism. I also wouldn't diminish the importance of partnerships with NGOs, because those can help to verify and sell the benefits of proposed actions and really enhance the prominence of proposals that are being made. And then lastly, given the likely very committed focus to addressing the challenging issues of equity and inclusion that the new administration has committed to, the more any policies and proposed actions can really help to enhance outcomes for frontline communities, for people of color, whether those be health-based outcomes or economic-based outcomes, I think there's more likely to be a real eagerness to embrace those kinds of approaches.
In identifying solutions and opportunities for decarbonization, we know that many startups and established companies alike have developed technologies that could aid in these decarbonization efforts. What are some of the new technologies that would need to be adopted widely to achieve EU and US decarbonization goals? And how would those policies, these policies that we've discussed, incentivize adoption of those technologies?
Yeah, sure. So thanks. I think I mentioned 5 areas which are top of mind in Europe at the moment, and where the European Commission and governments are working to encourage the technologies in a variety of ways, through funding and through permitting state aid projects and so on and so on. I'll mention them quickly and then go through them one by one. The first is clean hydrogen, then batteries, building renovation, offshore wind, and then energy system integration. In terms of hydrogen, the Commission in July released a plan for a hydrogen strategy for climate neutral Europe. So again, a lofty title, but the aim is to install at least 6 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers by 2024 and 40 gigawatts by 2030. There's a cooperation which has been set up across Europe through something called the Clean Hydrogen Alliance. And this hydrogen alliance, again, similar to batteries, which I'll talk about in a minute, have requested, and that's being looked at the moment, permission to give state aid in order to support those efforts. Moving then on to batteries. So the European Battery Alliance was launched in 2017. And the aim there is to put sustainable batteries at the core of a strategy for a sustainable Europe. And to decarbonize batteries in the value chain. And that's an area where they have already approved 3.2 billion in state aid in order to support those efforts. Then renovations, building renovations are a very important area. Again, the next generation EU funding will be important there. There's something called the Renovation Wave Initiative, which looks to support these efforts. And it's based around the fact that across the EU at the moment, it's estimated that around 70% of building stock is inefficient. And while, of course, a lot of new buildings go up every day, about 85% of those buildings are likely still to be around in some shape or form, for the coming decades. And that's while only 1% are being renovated a year. So there's a lot of inefficiency there. And the aim is to try and do something about that because, of course, it's a major contributor to the decarbonization if we don't have those buildings being as efficient as they can be. So as I mentioned earlier, it was the typical process. There was a consultation. Then there was throughout the summer, there was a report that came out in October, and it's now up to the European Commission, Parliament, and so on to figure out the legislation. A fourth area that the EU are prioritizing as part of the Green Deal has to do with offshore wind. And in June 2020 alone, so just a few months ago, the European Investment Bank, who are, of course, a part of this entire infrastructure, provided around 175 million in loans for wind farms in Austria and Spain. And I think we can assume that there's more to come. And then finally, there's a strong emphasis on energy system integration. And that has a lot to do with the efficiency in the way in which energy which is created in one part of Europe is then transported to another part where it's needed. To give you one example, in Germany, a lot of the wind energy is created in the north, whereas industry tends to be in the middle of the country or in the south, and you need to make sure that you're transporting that in an efficient way. I think those are probably the main ones.
Great, thank you. Gary, are these technologies, batteries, rebuilding, renovations, offshore wind, also key to U.S. decarbonization efforts?
Yeah, very much so. I fully agree with those areas as likely to be priorities if there's a change in administration. And really, as you know, with $2 trillion, there will be such an appetite for any area. Agriculture, a strong focus, transportation, energy production, power generation, very significant potential for incentives, government aid, creative programs to remove obstacles. I'm actually, Sebastian's discussion of the building renovations and the potential there really reminds me of the experience we had in the Obama administration when Vice President Biden led the recovery effort of ensuring that there was a whole of government approach to these issues so that, for example, the effort to foster enhanced energy efficiency for low and moderate income homeowners required that there be a ready informational tool of home energy audits that was available. But then there was a recognition that there was a financing impediment. So financing was made available to actually bring the ability to accomplish energy efficiency changes to bear. And then lastly, there was a whole jobs training component so that someone who knew what their problem was and had the money to actually accomplish it up front could readily go and find a solution that could be plugged into a resolution. I think you'll see a consideration and a commitment to really whole of government approaches. I do think there are 4 areas where there's likely to be a really strong push. One is on electric charging infrastructure, some 500,000 new chargers that the Vice President has spoken about to really facilitate that transformation and as part and parcel of an overall focus on really building U.S. manufacturing leadership of electric vehicles, both for autos and trucks. And really focused on automotive job creation. Secondly, a recognition of the importance and potential of enhanced energy storage. And then third, enhanced transmission to facilitate grid modernization, resilience, and both of those really combined to help to deploy distributed generation and utility scale renewables and to make for a more seamless and modern system. And then lastly, I think even a recognition of the importance of innovative negative emissions technologies such as carbon capture and air removal and some tax incentives that might be important for helping to facilitate those, given the real challenge of meeting the net zero emissions goals on the timeframes that we're talking about.
Transitioning a little bit beyond decarbonization, Sebastian, I'm interested in where else you see the greatest prospect for policy emphasis in the EU for adoption of other sustainable technologies that help to address topics like ocean conservation, biodiversity protection, freshwater management, and other significant threats.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Well, so the European Green Week, which is taking place this week from October 19 to 22, the focus of that is on biodiversity, as many of you know. So that's clearly something that the Commission is very focused on. I think another area which is important has to do with plastics, where there's a big focus on renewable products and single-use plastics, and where these products are found to be unsustainable, the limiting of their marketing and sale and so on. So trying to encourage things that will help and trying to reduce things that they think are going to be a hindrance. And then secondly, thirdly, as I referred to earlier, I think one area which is going to be quite interesting has to do with the reporting around sustainable claims. I referenced earlier that there's going to be a push to encourage companies who are engaged or investors or whoever it may be who are engaged in this space to make sure that the environmental claims that they make around products and services, that those are legitimate. And the aim of that is to help, you see I've got solar energy in my face here now. This is very appropriate. But to make sure that, end buyers, investors, consumers, and so on, when they read claims about the sustainability of a given product or service, that they can rely on the fact that that is correct and feel more comfortable in their purchasing decision.
Thanks for that, Sebastian. Gary, do you see significant or similarities between those areas that Sebastian drew out and opportunities in the United States?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, you and I spend a lot of time in our practice on the kinds of sustainability claims issues that Sebastian was just talking about. We've seen the focus on the plastics crisis really resonate and the steps that companies are taking. We've seen a focus on circular economy principles as a key part of that solution and more generally, and I think we'll continue to see that. Two other areas where I think we'll see extensive investment are steps that are taken to enhance climate resilience in general. And, that's how do we plan for and think about things like natural infrastructure solutions that can really help to dampen storm surges, or steps to improve the built environment so it can deal with rising temperatures, more violent storms, those kinds of climate-induced crises. And then the entire area around water equity and access for frontline communities. The crisis in Flint, Michigan that many of you may have heard about, where there was lead contamination in the drinking water, really, I think, has resonated across the country and highlighted a lot of those infrastructure disparities around clean and safe drinking water and sanitation. And I would expect that we'll see significant public investment to help close that water equity gap as well.
Well, Sebastian and Gary, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Would you like to share any final closing thoughts on decarbonization policies and what we can expect in Brussels, Washington, and other capitals? Sebastian, we'll kick it off with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lindsay. So I would say, definitely keep an eye on Brussels, but do not forget the big European capitals. As many of you will know, member states of the EU are responsible for picking their own energy mix. That's a national competence. So you want to make sure that, if you're considering a project in Germany, Spain, Italy, or whatever it is, that you're close to the national government. But as I've mentioned a number of times, there's a lot of funding which is being made available or either being blessed in the form of state aid at the EU level. So you want to make sure that you're well connected at the EU level as well. In summary, I just say that I think everyone in this room obviously is interested in something. You're surfing the regulatory wave, as it were, right? I mean, there's a huge push for all of the technologies that you're looking at. So you're in the right place. Just make sure that you're in exactly the right place and in exactly the right conversations. And then I think everybody here is going to do very well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gary, what about in the United States? Any final closing thoughts?
Well, I would say, fasten your seatbelts. The next few weeks and perhaps months will be an interesting demonstration of the resilience of the U.S. democracy and the degree to which we really identify and want to be a global leader in finding solutions to these global challenges and to really recognize and take advantage of the critical economic opportunities that really presents. And, we're very much poised for some breathtaking action on climate and clean energy policy that would be at the core of the mission of the new administration if there's a change, that those would very much support and catalyze the kinds of business activities that that you all in Monaco are pursuing. They would help to align the U.S. with the EU trends that Sebastian's been talking about, and I think create an enormous range of opportunities. So certainly I look forward to your thoughts and questions and a conversation around these matters, and appreciate all of the critical work that you're doing.
Well, thank you both, and thanks to everyone for participating in this question and answer period.
Thank you, everyone. We have Sebastian Voss on stage, and we do have Gary Guzzi, who's joined live now. Is there a question for anyone in the audience for the time being? I'll kick us off then, because just to maybe flip it around and think about the focus we have here on fostering innovation and sustainability, in your opinion, is enough being done to foster innovation at the early stage and going through and all the way to commercialization in the US and in Europe on a policy side?
Gary, you want to do the US first? Keeping in mind that we have 5 minutes.
Yes, I'll be brief, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. I think there's a attentiveness on the part of the at least likely incoming administration, if there's a change based on the election, to the requirements for the research development and deployment of new technology, and a real focus on understanding what are the impediments that would prevent more wide and more rapid dispersion of those technologies and the scaling of those technologies. So I am quite optimistic that the kinds of solutions that many of the companies here are thinking about and involved in would find significant traction and attentiveness and a receptive audience around precisely because of the need to move quickly, to experiment, and to find a range of technology solutions that can help to address the challenges that the climate crisis is presenting.
So I'd say that the short answer to your question, is enough being done, is no. And the good news is that there's a realization that not enough is being done. I think in Europe, we often look jealously at California, Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon, and so on, all tremendously successful companies, all based in the US. And so I think there's a feeling, first of all, that there's a really, really strong commitment across the EU to sustainability, but also there's a desire to be leading in this space, both from a policy point of view and from an economic and financial point of view. So the structures that we were discussing earlier on, the financing that's been made available, but also the one thing which we didn't get to in the video, but one of the things the Commission is doing now is actively financially supporting companies that they think are going to be able to push this agenda forward. So they're actually picking winners. Now, that I think is good news if you're one of the companies that is being chosen as a winner, but if not, then it makes the battle harder for you. So I'd say not enough is being done, but we are doing more and more, and try to be a part of that process because it'll help you and it'll help us. Sounds a bit Jerry Maguire, but there we go.
Thank you. We have another question come in. So there seems to be a huge gap in multilateral action and cooperation. Do you think there is a legal gap in protection of the global commons and enforcement of protection of these critical global resources?
Oof. Gary, you can go first.
I think there hasn't been, candidly, enough thought given to that issue and how it might manifest itself. The challenges of sort of multilateral and international action have been sort of so profound and so basic. How do you achieve a Paris Climate Agreement? And then the disruption caused by the U.S. withdrawal from that and seeming renunciation of its leadership, that there really hasn't been the making good on commitments for a green climate fund and recognition of the scope of developing country commitments that should be brought to bear for global equity reasons. So I think that that's an area where we'll continue to see development, and it's right to predict efforts at enhanced development, just as we're seeing that increasingly domestically, that there are those trends where litigants are trying to explore a range of novel legal theories that can help to, in some ways, enforce a measure of accountability, responsibility, or transparency around climate consequences. But absolutely right to think that that's an area that will really expand in the future.
Yeah, so maybe just to pick up on that, I think that global laws on energy are obviously going to be difficult. Global agreements more likely, and I think the first thing that many people would hope for if there is a Biden administration is to welcome you back to the Paris Agreement, Gary. But beyond that, I think many of you will have seen the Economist cover, I think it was last week or the week before, where they talk about the geopolitics of the future of energy. And what you're seeing is a real battle between China, the US, Europe, and others around who's going to dominate these sectors. And China's got a pretty strong lead there, and I don't think much of an incentive to play by the rules that are dictated by Europe, the US, or anywhere else. So I think that this question of sort of regulation, laws, agreements on global energy policy are it's a very, very good question, but it's a very tricky area.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you, Guy, for joining us. Thank you also to Lindsay for the session and everyone else at the Covington team who helped put this together. So
nice to be here.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
I'm sure Sebastian and Guy would be happy to be reached out to and have any further questions that do come up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here until the bitter end, which apparently is in an Irish pub tomorrow night.
I'm very jealous of that as well. Good to see you all.
Thank you. So next up, I'd like to introduce Solène Broad-Galley, the CEO of Polystyvert.
Polystyrene is a widely used plastic. It's mainly used for packaging, insulation, but also for food products. However, it is the least recycled plastic. And the reason for that is the difficult access to feedstock. Moreover, polystyrene is highly contaminated, and the current mechanical technologies are not able to have a good enough product in order to really close the loop. So in order to overcome this problem, at Polystyvert, we have developed a dissolution technology. I mean that we put the polystyrene in contact with an essential oil. That's a real essential oil, so a very safe product. And as you can see, it dissolves very quickly. This is real time, this is not accelerated. And what's great is that this solvent is selective of polystyrene. I mean that the other plastic will not dissolve. And this makes it very easy for us to filter them out. We can then remove any kind of plastic, but also paper, cardbox, any large contamination. Then we apply our proprietary purification process in order to remove graphite, lime, pigment. After this step, the polystyrene is very clean, but it is still liquid. So in order to make it solid again, we add an anti-solvent, the polystyrene precipitate, meaning that it becomes solid and it falls down. And the beauty of the thing is that the contaminant in solution go in the solvent. They do not remain in the polystyrene. That way we can remove any kind of contaminant. And the end product is a very high quality polystyrene that can be reused for any kind of application, even the food application. So that's a real circular economy. And the solvent is also recovered to be reused. So that's very energy efficient. Here you can see some feedstock we can take, so that's highly contaminated or full of color. And the end product is really crystal clear or very white, what is a proof of the quality of our end product. Our demonstration plant, located in Montreal, Canada, is up and running since June 2018. And our business model is to sell licenses. We focus on license because we are an IP-focused company. Moreover, that license is an asset-light model, so we are able to make multiple licenses in the same time. Our revenue stream comes first from trials. We provide many trials to the client, and when they like the trial and the recycled polystyrene they get, then they can start buying engineering in order to build the plant and to buy the license. A license is 2 million Canadian dollars, and when the client's plant is completely built and up and running, there are royalties per kilogram of recycled polystyrene. So to who can we sell this technology? We can sell it to polystyrene producers. So those are the one on the bottom of my drawing, people like Total or Ineos, for example. And we can also sell it to polystyrene transformers. So the people who buy the resin and who make items with that, like insulation. I guess you recognize a couple of logos, like a Lego, Apple, Bic. But the more advanced client is a consortium in Quebec. That's a group of companies that went together in order to buy a first license from us. And we are very excited. The construction of the plant will start in Q1 2021. So that's very, very soon, and we are very excited with this contract. We also have some very advanced clients like Knove, who is a very large insulation company. They already bought engineering conceptual and trials, and we are currently negotiating a license. Concerning the competition, it exists mechanical technologies. However, they are not able to remove the contamination as well as our technology, so that's our competitive advantage. Depolymerization is also a competitor. However, it's much more expensive, and also it requires much more energy. And eventually, BASF does chemcycling. However, this is even more expensive, and that's not really recognized as recycling in Europe. This is much more recognized as production optimization. Our best competitive advantage is to be energy efficient. Here you can see the regular process in order to manufacture virgin polystyrene. So that's a long process with a lot of transformation that generates a lot of GHG. And our technology makes a very short loop at the end. We already are the shortest loop. So the other technology can also set a circular economy, but that's pretty obvious on my drawing that they are longer loop. So we require much less energy than us to recycle, and also to get the product. We don't need to repolymerize, so this requires less energy. And this also allows us to emit less GHG emission. Concerning the financial forecast, we plan to sell first license in 2021. So as I told you, this will be the Quebec consortium. I plan 2 licenses in 2022, but that could be earlier. For example, Kno for Total could be earlier, I hope so. But you can see the trend of the cash flow that's increasing. So this proves that our company will be profitable soon. Concerning the funding, we are seeking 2.5 to 4 million euro in order to finance our growth. Most of the cash will be used for commercialization because we are there. We need more sales force, we need more marketing in order to close deal. We will also use some cash in order to do technology optimization on our demo plant at Montreal. And we'll use a small amount in order to do a research and development. We already have a term sheet on the table. With this term sheet, it's coming from BV. BV is a very large polystyrene company located in Northern Europe. They manufacture a lot of product in polystyrene, but especially fish boxes that they export all over Europe. They are the leader in this market. And the other investors are our current investor who reinvest in the project. So basically, we miss a bit more than 1 million euro now. And the valuation of the company is 10.3 million euro. Now I have to tell you that there is a momentum now, especially because of the regulatory pressure. The pressure and regulation increase in Europe, especially with the plastic tax. So that's something very important. Moreover, there is a revival on the economy that the government would like to do through clean tech. So the Canadian government is very supportive and we do appreciate their support. And I think the European government also want to support the growth through clean tech. So there is a real momentum now for technology like ours. Concerning our exit strategy, we could be acquired by polystyrene producers or transformers, or we could also be acquired by specialty chemical company or waste management. By the way, we are already in contact with all these people. Most of them are already our clients. Finally, a word about the team. So you know I'm Solène Brouard. I'm the CEO of the company, and I have an MBA, and I formerly worked for Bombardier and for Citroën. Marianne Lépinois is our CFO. She's also an investor in the company, and she's very experienced in M&A and in risk management, so she's very helpful to raise cash. Jan Kaplan is our CTO, so he's the wonderful guy who built our plant, and he has an extensive international experience in plant construction. And eventually, Professor Cote is our Chief Scientific Officer, so he's the real inventor of the technology. He was a professor and researcher at the University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières, and he retired and he is now full-time with us. So we are very happy with that. And as you can see, we are a very multidisciplinary team. So as a conclusion, join us for a greener tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Solène. Thank you. I'll kick off with a question, and anyone from the audience can come up and join afterwards to ask one. Can you just maybe go into a little bit more, please, on the technology side? You know, obviously you mentioned that polystyrene is the least recycled plastic in the world. So just why it's been so difficult and what the breakthrough is for you to be able to achieve this.
Yes, indeed. Polystyrene is the least recycled plastic for 3 main reasons. First of all, the difficult access to feedstock. I mean that in a sorting center, they could sort the polystyrene. That's something that is technically doable, but they currently don't do it because nobody wants to buy it. And there's nobody to buy it because there is no technology. So we think by creating the technology, we're able to bring value in this product. And this is how we'll convince the sorting center to actually sort the polystyrene in order to do it. Moreover, even if they sort it, this polystyrene will be highly contaminated. I mean that it will be mixed with many other plastics, with PP, PVC, PT, and so on. So that's a challenge to perfectly remove any other plastic. That's a difficult challenge, and mechanical technologies are not able to remove everything. So the end product is so that's not good enough in order to set a circular economy, especially for food grade product. So that's what our technology brings. We can remove anything that is not polystyrene. We can have a very high purity of polystyrene, even food grade quality. So that's a huge improvement. Hope this answers your question.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And there's one more coming up.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. Very nice presentation. A quick question. What does a plant cost? So there's 2 million for the license, but what does it actually cost? And based on what you've just said about the sorting, aren't the sorters maybe the best customers right now? I mean, isn't it a long value chain to first want the final product, use your technology, but we still need then to get a feed supplied?
Indeed. The cost of a plant really depends on the size of the plant and on what the customer already has. For example, a client like Total already has a distillation column and a devolatilization system, so that makes a huge difference compared to a client that has nothing and that has to build a greenfield, you know. But in order to give you an order of magnitude, the client mostly asks for something like 10 to 7,000 tons per year as a capacity of recycled polystyrene. And let's say that's a 7,000 ton a year plant could be something like 10 million euro. This is all inclusive. I mean that this includes the equipment, the installation of the equipment, the engineering, the indirect cost, the building, and the license. So that's a rough order of magnitude. And now, you're right that waste management company or sorting center do have the feedstock, so they can be good clients. However, that's not really their core business to actually do the recycling process. A company like, for example, Suez or Veolia in France, and Vogt or Eslava, that kind of company, they have the name recycler, but what they are good at is to collect the waste and to properly sort it. So usually the end product is chips of PET or chips of one specific plastic. And this plastic has to be treated after the sorting in order to be able to close the loop. So this requires a very specific experiment. And I don't think that sorting center are the strongest in this field. I observed that companies that have an interest in the end product are really more willing to do it. I mean that because they want the recycled polystyrene, they will do what they have to do in order to get it. That's the reason why we focus on transformers. We focus on companies that make items with the polystyrene. So the insulation company, the packaging company, the food packaging company, they are the ones that are the most willing to do it today.
Thank you. And what's the comparison in cost for your recycled polystyrene compared to virgin product?
It's more affordable to recycle polystyrene than to buy virgin. However, with the very specific situation created by the COVID crisis, I would say that today is a very challenging moment. Just to give you a rough idea, let's say that the price of the virgin polystyrene is currently 1.2 euro per kilogram, and the price of the waste, so I mean the price of the raw material in our process, is something like 0.7 euro per kilogram. So that's extremely expensive, and it left very few room today to make the recycling. But we can do it. Our recycling process is, our cost of operation is more or less something like 0.4, 0.35 euro per kilogram. Depends on many parameters, but just to give you a rough idea. So with the figure I gave you, you can see that buying the waste and transform it is cheaper than buying virgin polystyrene. And that's the case today, even if the price of virgin polystyrene is really low. So obviously the price will go up in the next years, and so the margin of our technology will increase.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Celine, for joining us and presenting.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So moving on to our next presenter, we have Brett Jordan, CEO of CRDC, joining us from South Africa.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see
Connor?
you. We can see
great.
you.
Perfect. And you can see the screen?
Yes, all good.
Perfect. Thank you, Connor. Hello, everybody. As Connor mentioned, I'm Brett Jordan, the CEO of CRDC Global, and I'm very honored to be presenting Resonate to you today, the solution to plastic waste. Our strategic vision as CRDC Global is to make a significant impact on the plastic challenge. It's a grand strategic vision, one as large as the problem at hand. And in addition to making a large impact on the plastic challenge, we also intend to significantly reduce CO2 emissions and stimulate community renewal. Let's start with the problem. The problem is very clear. The world is drowning in plastic. Only 9.5% of plastics recycled. The remaining 90.5% ends up either being incinerated in our landfills or in our oceans. In fact, plastic is found on every corner of our earth. It's in the air we breathe, the food we eat, and it's contaminated our pristine environments. In addition, more than 150 million tons of CO2 end up in the atmosphere as a result of incineration of plastic every year. The problem is massive and is second only to climate change in terms of its scale and urgency. As a result, I'm very excited As a result, I'm very excited to tell you that CRDC have developed a scalable solution known as Resonate. Resonate is a breakthrough concrete modifier made from mixed plastic waste. Our proprietary technology accepts all types of plastic, can be mixed, dirty, and non-recyclable, converts it into a high-value aggregate that perfectly simulates construction sand, resulting in improved structural, thermal, insulating, and environmental properties. These include all structural and non-structural product applications. We effectively replace sand in the concrete mix with Resonate as a lightweight aggregate, and looking at 3 to 10% replacement by volume in structural products and up to 25% in non-structural products. And it is being used in everything from concrete blocks and pavers to underground piping to foundations for buildings. As a result, we've found a very strong demand from the concrete and construction industries. And the reason being is that Resonate's the only material from plastic waste to meet and exceed the needs of the construction industry. The reason for this is that its unique mineral composition bonds chemically to the cement in concrete. In addition, from a mechanical perspective, it's got a very porous composition and an irregular structure, and that bonds mechanically to the cement in concrete. And that's also why sand is in short demand, in short supply globally, because the sand that can be used in concrete needs to be irregular and therefore is usually harvested from rivers, oceans, and beaches. The result is we have either maintained or improved strength, maintained or improved fire resistance, a benign appearance, you cannot tell that it's actually in the product, reduced weight, and then importantly, improved insulation and reduced carbon emissions. Now, from an insulation perspective, we've had some very promising results from recent tests which indicate that a block with Resonate within it will have a greater insulating potential, it's known as the R value, than a normal block. And initial tests indicate up to 20%, which would basically lead to a net carbon saving for a house built with Resonate blocks over a long period of time due to the increased energy efficiency. Obviously, from a avoided incineration perspective, the climate change impacts are immediate. If you take plastic waste and instead of incinerate it, you put it into a constructive manner in an appreciating industry, you're finding a far better use and you're abating those emissions which would have gone into the atmosphere. Now, our global patent pending process involves two stages. The first is shredding and processing the plastic with specific mineral additives that do not require water and kill all pathogens. Initial tests indicate that it's actually effective against coronaviruses as well. And then the second process involves a heat extrusion, and the heat extrusion process, which results in this environmentally benign hybrid mineral polymer that bonds, as we said, very well to cement. Now, CRDC has taken this process and translated it into a low capex, high volume, replicable resin 8 plant design, which is basically utilizing off-the-shelf equipment and can process huge amounts of plastic. Just to put it into context, our standard plant, which we're going to deploy in Costa Rica, will process the entire mismanaged waste plastic of that entire country, just one plant. Now, this low capex, high volume relationship is very important and key to our financial viability. But equally important is the replicability, which leads to a globally scalable solution. Scalability is very relevant, obviously, given the commercial and environmental imperative that we face. If you look at every single population center around the world, they all have problems with waste supply and they have localized concrete production. This basically shows that we have supply and demand metrics in every urban center around the world. Now, because the aggregate market is so large in relation to the plastic market, if we replace just 2.8% of the sand used in concrete globally with Resin 8, it would absorb all of the globe's mismanaged plastic. The economic drivers obviously vary from location to location, but in all those that we've analyzed, our plants are financially profitable and viable. And now this results obviously in a potential for thousands of CRDC Resin 8 plants around the world, and the ability to absorb all of the world's plastic waste in a blue sky scenario, which would translate into a $50 billion per year opportunity. Obviously, this will have massive impacts, positive impacts on the globe and its inhabitants. From a primary basis, you're looking at 12 of the UN SDGs being achieved. Obviously, we have very strong environmental benefits in terms of buildings and infrastructure, climate resiliency, CO2 reduction, and plastic remediation from the environment. But on a secondary basis, we seek to leverage our business model to have a strong socio-economic impact and upliftment as well. And now this is a model which is actually guided by what we determine and call the next evolution of circularity, REAP, recover, enrich, appreciate, and prosper. It's key to the way that we operate, and the central thesis is we take waste and convert it as an input into an appreciating value sector. This creates a continuous interplay of demand and volume. From a practical perspective, our business model is relatively straightforward. We receive revenue for receiving waste, tipping fees, and then we receive revenue from selling Resin 8 to end producers. However, there are opportunities for integrating both upstream and downstream to capture additional value, and these can be easily achieved. From a company perspective, we've evolved from humble beginnings in 2010, when our founder, Don Thompson, had an idea of turning plastic waste into a construction input. Since then, we've formed a partnership with Pedregal, the largest concrete products manufacturer in Costa Rica. And we now have plants in 3 different countries, relationships with many large multinationals, and have won awards for our innovative solution. In terms of these 3 plants, we have 3 proof of concept. The first is a commercial proof of concept in Costa Rica. It's producing a ton a day of Resin 8, which is going into all of Pedregal's concrete products. A range of Pedregal's concrete products, which are all being sold at a premium. Pedregal, as a primary off-taker, has indicated that they will take the majority of supply from our full-scale plant, which we are planning to deploy imminently. And we've already, as a notable project, already built over 500 houses in collaboration with Habitat for Humanity, utilizing Resin 8 blocks in Costa Rica. In New Jersey, in the US, we have a pilot plant which has been utilized to seed the market and secure relationships and interests with a variety of different off-takers, most notably being Georgia Pacific Recycling, the largest recycler in the US, and a number of large brand multinationals. We are in the early stages of developing a plant in York in Pennsylvania. And in Cape Town, we have an operational plant that is producing 200 kgs of Resin 8 per day. We have investment from one of the largest construction companies in the region, as well as a large concrete manufacturer. and we are looking to scale up to a full commercial plant in the next 3 to 6 months. We have 5,000 social houses which will be built with the Resonate produced from that plant. So from a global perspective, our holdco is incorporated in Ireland and owns the majority of equity in the country-specific subsidiaries. We're just actually engaging in our global expansion. Now, this is driven by, one, the environmental imperative of the urgency and the scale of the problem, but secondly, from the enormous demand that we've experienced. Without even advertising, we've been inundated with interest from around the globe. We've just opened offices in New Zealand. We're just about to open in the UK, and we have interest from a number of parties around the world. This represents our current plant locations, our immediate and short-term pipeline. Now, our business model is obviously flexible, and it needs to be flexible in order to scale quickly. These multinationals that we've attracted the attention of are really interested in various different sectors, and we're looking to leverage those relationships in order to scale as quickly as possible. So for example, we are talking to cement manufacturers in Southeast Asia, and we'd look to co-locate plants across their footprint in Southeast Asia. In the US, we're talking to Georgia Pacific as a recycler, and we'd look to co-locate plants at their material recovery facilities across the US. Now, the interesting thing here, well, the key point is that we have to maintain flexibility in order to scale rapidly. So our preferred model is to own and operate the plants, but we're also open to co-investment or licensing with strategic large players. Each plant is economically viable, cash flow positive, and profitable within the first year of operation. Our base case model anticipates that we reinvest all our cash flows and then leverage third-party capital from debt providers in order to scale as quickly as possible. The result presents strong growth and compounding value over time. We're happy to share our financials, obviously, with interested parties. This is just some indications of our projected financials. So further adding to our exciting growth story is the second iteration of our product, which adds further downstream channels for demand and growth of Resonate plants. This is Resonate Plus. Resonate Plus bridges the plastic challenge with the climate change and emissions reductions. The process is relatively straightforward. It's also going to be subject to a patent very shortly. And it involves an additional step whereby we utilize specific additives which we coat around the Resonate particle. We then react those with flue gas from an industrial kiln or smelter, and in so doing, it captures the CO2 that is in that gas and forms a limestone casing around the Resonate particle. This can capture up to, initial tests indicate up to 200 kgs per ton of Resonate, 200 kgs of CO2. And the result is you get Resonate Plus, which it looks is indistinguishable in look and structure to natural limestone, but a fraction of the weight. And this is obviously going to have huge applications in ready-mix concrete and the cement industry, being obviously under intense pressure to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions as well as improve the sustainability credentials. So we see a dramatic and significant market for Resonate Plus co-locating with cement plants around the world to help to reduce the emissions and produce low carbon, more sustainable products. No abrasion or microplastics leaking into the environment after simulation with 200,000 passes by a mechanized simulator in an advanced science laboratory owned by the university. Now, these existing and new markets all present exciting opportunities for growth. CRDC have demonstrated commercial proof of concept, and we are ready to scale. Our plan is to build large-scale plants in initially 3 to 5 locations around the world, each with different and unique impacts. We had late stages of development with each of those plants. At least the first 3 were in late stages, and then we're in mid stages with the other 2. And these will form the basis for leveraging third-party debt capital. As mentioned, we've already engaged with a number of the DFIs, most notably the Commonwealth Development Corporation and the Asian Development Bank. They've indicated a strong interest in funding our rollout, funding the capex for multiple CRDC plants, because it exactly fits with their mandates for their developmental mandates and from an environmental and socio-economic perspective. Stages of discussion with two international funders. One is looking to fund development of a pipeline in developing countries. The other will provide debt and grant funding for our large-scale plants planned in Costa Rica, the US, and a Resonate Plus trial plant in the UK. We'll know the outcome of these discussions by the start of December, and as such, our capital requirements may vary dependent on the outcome. Perspective, we're still offering equity to strategic investors at the holdco level, which will fund working capital in order to help us accelerate our global expansion into various the focus and development of our pipeline. So in closing, CRDC is about to enter the world stage as a significant player in the plastic and climate change solution. We're very excited about the next stage of our journey, and we welcome your interest to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you. So, first question is coming. Are there any limitations of using the concrete with the resin?
We have found no limitations, so we are able to utilize Resonate in all concrete applications. The only limitations are in terms of the amount of volume of sand that you replace. So as I mentioned, for structural products, we found replacement by volume between 3 and 10% leads to on par or improved characteristics. And then for non-structural products, you can go up to 25% without losing any structural integrity.
And then also about the lifetime of the concrete. Are there any implications on this and anything that changes at the end of life of the concrete?
No, so this is the interesting thing, is that the Resonate particle is now it's essentially been vulcanized, and then when it forms and bonds with cement, it becomes encapsulated in the rock. So it is out of the waste stream forever. At the end of life of that building, which will be in 50 to 80 years' time, you can crush the rubble and reuse it with the Resonate in it again. So it is perfectly circular and can be reused an infinite number of times.
And then maybe a little bit more just on the plans for expansion and the plants and the regions looking to go into and how many over the coming 5 years.
Yeah, so it's at this stage it's all very blue sky, but it's very exciting. So we have just in terms of our immediate pipeline, we have up to 12 plants, but with these are with some strategic players that can help us accelerate dramatically. So for example, in the US, Georgia Pacific are working with us to set up our first plant. If that is successful, they want to roll out 50 to 100 plants across the US alone. Likewise, across Southeast Asia, we've been discussing partnerships with some large cement companies, and we look at rolling out dozens across particular regions. So on our base case, we believe that we could fund just through internal cash flows and third-party capital up to 60 plants over a 5-year period. But in our more optimistic case, if we leverage these international partnerships, we'd like to develop hundreds over the next 5 to 10 years. And if we wanted to solve the world's plastic problem, we'd develop 5,000 plants.
And then finally, what is the source of the CO2 for the Resonate Plus?
So that would be the CO2 that's in the flue gas from an industrial smelter. So for example, if you're co-locating at a cement producer, their kilns, they basically burn coal and RDF often in order to create the cement in their process, and that just goes straight into the atmosphere. So we would tap straight into that flue gas and capture the CO2 from, instead of going into the atmosphere, it gets encapsulated into the Resonate Plus particle.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you for joining us and asking those questions. All the best.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening. Appreciate the opportunity.
So moving on, we now have Robert Niven, who will be joining us as CEO of CarbonCure.
Good morning or afternoon in Monaco today. I'm Rob Niven, CEO and founder of CarbonCure. I also have a story about low carbon concrete as well, and I'd be happy to share that with you today. It's a complete pleasure to be joining you. I wish I had the opportunity to be there in person. So let's get started. Allow me just a few minutes to give you a bit of an overview about CarbonCure and who we are. We are what's considered a carbon removal technology company, also known as CO2 utilization, which is an essential technology for decarbonizing cities. We have been a pioneer in this space and are now the world leader in using CO2 to produce materials, in our case, concrete, which is considered a $1 trillion a year and 7 gigatons CO2 opportunity. And we're consolidating this lead right now by expanding into new CO2 utilization technologies, rapidly expanding into new geographic markets, introducing complementary digital products, and entering into the carbon credit space. We are certainly in that growth stage of development. To date, we've already shipped about $1 billion worth of concrete. These are our customers' revenues from shipping CarbonCure concrete from 300 plants across 3 different continents. We're experiencing considerable amount of demand from across the world, but in certain notable regions such as Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Gulf region. We use a SaaS model, which is extremely light and allows us to be able to scale very quickly. And this year we'll be introducing new technologies and business lines that contribute to our revenue model. Our company technology is patent protected with about 60 patents and have an extremely capital efficient model, as I'd mentioned. We've just finished updating our management team and adding some additional investors, which include Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is led by Bill Gates, Amazon, we were part of the inaugural Climate Pledge Fund, Microsoft, BDC, and many others. Speaking of Bill Gates, he popularized a very important statistic that I think speaks very clearly to the mega trends that we are looking to resolve. And that is that we'll be building at a rate of a new New York City every 30 days for the next 40 years. This will actually double the world's entire building stock over the next 40 years. And this is being brought on by urbanization, so the migration of people into cities at the same time as population growth. And that means more dense construction. Now, concrete is already the most abundant man-made material on the planet by far. So second only to drinking water, and certainly the most from a building materials perspective. You can just see the relative amounts as they differ to other common products in our daily lives. Now, the one issue about concrete is that it's very high concentrated impact on something that's called embodied carbon. Now, embodied carbon, from a building's perspective, is the amount of CO2 emissions that are released from the creation of construction materials and the construction process itself. New information has presented an alarming reality, and that's that the embodied CO2, so the upfront emissions, so these are the emissions released before the very first tenant ever steps foot in the building, account for about half, 50% of a building's lifetime emissions. The other 50% are from energy use, which trickle in over the lifetime of that building, which could be 50 years. So if we have any hope of meeting our climate targets from the built environment perspective, is we need to really concentrate on embodied carbon emissions. And that's been a very strong driver for our business with governments and construction professionals. The cement sector realizes the issue that they're up against and have created a 4-point plan to be able to help to decarbonize their industry. The first 3 have largely already been deployed and are mature solutions. Most of the incremental CO2 reductions will be in the space of CO2 capture, utilization, and storage, of which CarbonCure is the world leader. We've actually just published our roadmap on how we can close that gap using our technologies, which not only present a solution of reducing 500 million tons of CO2 per year by 2030, but it also allows the concrete industry to raise profits, improve product quality, and create a differentiated sales advantage at the very same time. You can go online and visit this and read this document for yourself if you like. The space is actually quite crowded, but CarbonCure, as I said, is by far the leader in the space. Lux Research ranked CarbonCure as the only positive listed technology in this space. We also account for about 90% of all CO2 utilization technology deployment worldwide. We were just named this year as North America's Clean Tech Company of the Year. and are finalists in the $20 million Carbon X Prize, which we're awaiting the final decisions just weeks away. The reason why we've been able to pull so far ahead from the crowd is that our business is driven by economics, not regulations or it's the right thing to do type mentality. It just makes business sense. It's also extremely capital light, using a SaaS model that allows us to be extremely scalable and applicable in every market. It's a proven technology with an expanding suite of solutions. We have proven market traction with expanding market adoption. And very importantly, is that our technology applies to all of the concrete market, not only a small partition, which certain technologies are truly only able to address. To date, we've already supplied nearly 8 million cubic yards of concrete. If you look at that another way, that would be enough concrete to pour the foundation for about 30,000 windmills, or to build a road halfway around the world. So we're certainly gaining that market impact, and we're just getting started. So here's a picture of one of our technology installations. In fact, this is where one is in my hometown of Victoria, British Columbia. You can see the retrofit technology and how the concrete producer has actually rebranded themselves to be able to take advantage of the low carbon nature of their product. How the technology works is that the CO2 is injected to concrete as it's being batched, using all the same materials and processes. That concrete then is mineralized, which then forms improved strength, which then provides greater resource efficiency by needing to require less cement, which then provides a doubling up of CO2 emission reductions. All of this is 100% compatible with the supply chain and standards, which have allowed us to be able to scale very quickly. So let's take a closer look. What we're doing is we're turning the CO2 into these what look like sugar cubes. And what this actually is calcium carbonate. So in some ways, this is a biomimicry play where we're actually taking the CO2 and, just like coral and shells, are turning it back into calcium carbonate. But we're doing that as a nanomaterial within concrete, which then gives the concrete that added strength and performance, which then lends itself to those economic benefits. So if you're one of our 300 customers around the world, these are the kinds of graphs that really get you excited. It shows that by using this technology, you're able to use less cement by making concrete of equivalent performance, but you're also able to tighten up the standard deviation of your concrete. Because what would keep you up at night would be thinking about those 1 or 2 loads of concrete that left your plant that didn't meet the standard or the spec. And to be honest, all concrete plants do this, but it's how much of this that matters. And what we do is we really minimize the amount of delinquent concrete which would leave a plant by providing a much tighter standard deviation or quality. The message is certainly getting out. Our concrete has been adopted, as I said, in 3 different continents. Our home market is North America. Most of our adoption, about 85%, is in the US, and our next market is going to be in Europe. And we're really excited about this next phase of development. And we've already just been announced regulatory approval within Germany, which will allow us to accelerate our deployment. So we create value for our concrete producers in more ways than just providing them better quality at a lower cost and carbon footprint. We also teach them and also directly impact the built environment specifications. So whether it be a potential project in Monaco or many of the hundreds of other projects around the world that have used this technology, this gives our concrete producers a competitive advantage to be able to go out into the marketplace and supply more projects and gain more market share, and also being able to do that at a lower cost advantage. So very interested in exploring opportunities, whether that be in Monaco, Europe, or any other part of the world. This has an accelerating impact on our business to be able to allow us to enter into markets faster and to be able to start to convert the industry. I'd say that one of our largest users today was Amazon. And that was one of the main reasons on why they chose CarbonCure to make one of their initial investments, because it just made sense. And they were already using it today for things like their new headquarters and many of their fulfillment centers. For instance, the one at CVG, which is the 6th largest construction project in the United States right now. Another area where we're able to create demand and climate impact is through public policy. We've created policy models and implemented them throughout North America that have shown that there's a way to be able to change specifications for public construction projects or infrastructure spending that incurs no additional costs, but achieves deep CO2 reductions. This was first created in Honolulu. They received an award in Copenhagen by the C40 Cities Group for this policy, and has now been rapidly adopted across hundreds of different cities and states across North America. And we expect there'll be a strong demand for these types of solutions in Europe and Asia. A new way that we've also created a new revenue stream and created a driving force within our adoption within our customer base is by entering into the carbon credits business. There's been an entirely new demand for carbon removal offsets that are commanding a high premium of anywhere between $75 to $800 a ton. Because CarbonCure is the world leader in carbon removal technologies, we have by far the largest inventory today of carbon credits that can be sold to typically large corporate tech giants that are looking to eliminate their entire history of CO2 emissions. You may have followed the announcements by Microsoft, and we're currently in talks with them to be able to help them meet their demands, and have already established ourselves as the leader in this space with purchases from Shopify and Stripe. And there's many more on the way. And we're also consistent with some of the new standards and rules that are being created, such as the VCS standard for CO2 carbonation of concrete, and also the new Oxford offset standards, which were just published a couple months ago. So we see this as being an opportunity that actually might be as big as the licensing revenues from our technology itself. And these revenues can be shared back with our customers to be able to drive more growth, which then creates more credits, which then creates the cyclical environment of driving even more growth and more technology commercialization. So how do we make money? Our business model is to serve the very large total addressable market of concrete producers around the world, of which there are about 100,000. Today, our customers would directly control about 15,000 plants. We use a SaaS model where we charge no CapEx. We don't charge $1 for installing this technology, but we're paid on a monthly reoccurring 5-year renewable contract. We have very high margins of over 75%, which allow us to be able to use this model, coupled with the fact that our installation costs are less than $10,000, which is orders of magnitude from other technologies that are in this space, and is one of the main reasons on why we've been able to scale up so quickly. Our MRR today is around $500,000 with signed contracts. The remaining contract values of those signs are around 20 million, and we're projecting an ARR, an annual recurring revenue of $100 million in the coming years. And the beauty of SaaS models is that we're building off of the last ARR from the prior month or year for the next year. So this continues to scale at such a rapid rate. We have many other growth strategies that we're implementing this year, things like digital, things like credits, new technologies, that many of them we haven't had time to cover off today, but which allow us to be able to use even more CO2 and to be able to create more of a circular impact within concrete production. This year, we actually experienced record-breaking growth. We more than, we hit about 150% of our target despite COVID. So I think this really shows the resiliency of our team and our product, but also the demand for climate solutions despite what's going on with public health. Our leadership team is complete. We've just added a round of new investors, which were led by Breakthrough and Amazon. We're very excited about adding some prop tech funds as well, such as Turanga and 2150, which give us targeted impacts within Southeast Asia and Europe, respectively. So as you can see, we've been able to attract the very best investors in the world that have climate mission alignment with CarbonCure to allow us to be able to scale up as fast as possible. We are, as I said, just closed around. We have opportunities for accepting additional investment by the right value-added investors. As you can see, we've really drawn the all-star team of some of the top investors in climate with strong mission alignment. Use of these funds will be going towards new market growth, building out this carbon credit business, as well as our new digital and hardware products, of which we're extremely excited about accelerating the deployment to meet the demand of climate solutions today, while saving the concrete producers a lot of money while improving their products. We have access to over $15 million and are awaiting the decision from the $20 million Carbon X Prize, as I said, just weeks away. And we're seeking investors for this next stage of growth, and we welcome anyone to come join our syndicate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. I'll kick off a question myself, and then maybe someone from the audience will come up to the mic as well. What is the information around the actual CO2 being captured and it going into the cement or the concrete?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we did cover everything off today. Today, all of the CO2 is captured from post-industrial sources. So these are flue gas stacks that are captured by third-party distributors. So companies like Linde and Praxair, which are in the business of typically capturing the CO2 and reading it to the food and beverage industry. We use this CO2 today because it's abundant and very reliable supply of CO2 for our concrete producers. We are already developing alternative sources of CO2, which provide us potential economic benefits, which would be from renewable natural gas or landfill capture sites, and also directly from cement kilns. In fact, we led the world's first and only integrated CO2 capture and use project from a cement kiln, where that CO2 was used for concrete production in the Atlanta, Georgia area, of which you can actually visit that community today to see the concrete that was made from cement kiln CO2.
And then it was asked, what studies have been done or have you looked into around the use of the concrete and then again at the end of life with the CO2 going into the concrete?
Yeah, the concrete that CarbonCure has supplied, projects that we've supplied today, has been everything that you can possibly imagine except maybe a nuclear reactor. So that includes airports, highways, high-rises, residential, sidewalks, everything under the sun. Every time we go into a project, it has to be able to pass the scrutiny, whether on long-term durability, fresh properties, hardened properties. So we have encyclopedias of reports and independent studies that show that there's no negative effect, if only positive effects on the quality and longevity of the concrete.
Thank you. And you mentioned a little bit on the licensing model, or not like the model going forward, very low capex. How are the expansion plans going in Europe as your next target?
Yeah, so Europe is one of those markets that did require a small regulatory checkoff. So we did go through that process, and despite COVID, it was done, we think, quite rapidly, which speaks to the acceptance of the technology. So that's in place right now. Now what we're doing is we're going back to some of these concrete producers and builders that we've already been developing relationships with, including those related to one of our newest investors, 2150. And then signing up new production facilities, and as well as speaking to some of those early project developers that will be using the concrete for their projects. So we have a great amount of demand on the project side, and we'll be announcing some of the initial suppliers very shortly, of which we would hope would be in Monaco as well.
Very good. And then the last one that comes on is competition. So just, obviously there's quite a few companies in this space, lots of companies looking at utilizing CO2, capture, storage, and just who you see out there as the main competition and how you differentiate.
It's really hard to call these companies competition. And I mean that from the perspective of we need every shot on goal. As a Canadian, that's something we talk about with hockey analogies. But what I mean by that is that I like to say our competition is complacency in the concrete industry, about not being willing to innovate. We need all of these CO2 utilization solutions within the concrete space, because most of the time they're completely complementary, such as the last speaker is working on CO2 to sand. There's no reason why that couldn't be used in concrete being produced with CarbonCure's technologies, as many others. So they tend not to take away. Last speaker is working on CO2 to sand. There's no reason why that couldn't be used in concrete being produced with CarbonCure's technologies, as many others. So they tend not to take away from one another. They tend to complement each other. There are one or two exceptions from that, but we need all of these technologies to get to market as rapidly as possible. And CarbonCure looks to be the pioneer to be able to
everyone else who joined us in Monaco and from around the world. So we shall see everyone tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Monaco time, and enjoy the rest of your day, Robert.
Thank you.